In this video, we're gonna look at how I use dopamine to stay off alcohol. I'll also be sharing some tactics that you can use to either reduce or eliminate pretty much anything that you are struggling with. This could be excessive use of social media, drugs, alcohol, sugar, junk food, porn, or anything like that. Dopamine is quite a wide subject. And I'm not going to go through all the details about dopamine. I'm not a psychiatrist, nor am I a neuroscientist. But based on my experience, I'm going to share with you how I learned to use dopamine to my advantage. So in this video, we're going to cover 5 key things about dopamine. Number 1, we will look at what is dopamine. 2, we will look at why do we need dopamine. Then we will look at how much dopamine do we need. And then is the good dopamine and is the bad dopamine. And then towards the end, we will discuss how we can use our own bodies to produce as much dopamine as possible naturally. In short, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that sits in your brain. It's responsible mainly for your motivation. So people that are highly motivated tend to have high levels of dopamine. Dopamine is also responsible for your focus. So people that are extremely focused tend to have higher levels of dopamine than people who are not focused. Dopamine is also the feel-good hormone. So dopamine definitely regulates your mood. So it's responsible for how you feel. When you have a lot of dopamine pumping through your system, you tend to feel very good. When you have lower levels of dopamine, you tend to feel lag and sad and you just don't have motivation. Now, number 2, why do we need dopamine? Dopamine is actually important for our actual survival. Why do we say that? So there are certain behaviors that you need to exert to stay alive. Let's take a simple example like food. You need to eat to stay alive. So what the brain does, it sends you feelings of pleasure every time you eat. Because how the brain works, every time you get a sensation of pleasure, you tend to repeat that behavior. So the dopamine will send you signals of pleasure every time you eat so that you can repeat that behavior, so that you can continue eating. That's just a basic example. Other things like drinking water, things that are meant to help you survive will release dopamine. How much dopamine do we need? Dopamine is actually a double-edged sword because if you have too much dopamine in your system, you'll suffer from a condition called schizophrenia. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you have low levels of dopamine, you struggle from Parkinson's disease. And there's evidence to suggest that people with ADHD have low levels of dopamine. That is why a lot of them struggle with concentration and focus, because dopamine is responsible for that focus and drive and concentration that you get. Now, we understand that you need optimum levels of dopamine because too much of it is not good and too little of it is not good. Is there good dopamine and bad dopamine? That's a very interesting question. So, not all dopamine is made equal. Why do I say this? There's an easy fix dopamine and there's dopamine you have to work hard for. And unfortunately, the easy fix dopamine tends to be detrimental to your health and your well-being. Whereas the dopamine that you work hard for, that is the dopamine that you want, and that is the dopamine that is more sustainable. Here are some sure ways to really spike up your dopamine. Let's take some examples. Alcohol. When you take alcohol, your dopamine levels shoot up. But guess what? When the alcohol wears off, you get a crash and your dopamine levels drop to levels before you actually took the alcohol. So this can be very dangerous, especially if you're someone who struggles with ADD or ADHD. Why is that? People with ADD generally have lower levels of dopamine. So when they take a substance like alcohol or drugs, it shoots up the dopamine levels and they experience the sense of euphoria. And because they are used to going around with lower levels of dopamine, they just get a rush from this feeling and they just want more and more and more of it. Unfortunately, what happens is when the dopamine levels drop, they drop even lower than they were. So if you're someone with ADD who already has suppressed levels of dopamine, and now you have even lower levels of dopamine, it causes major issues like depression. You see people sitting in bed with no energy to do anything. You just wonder that this person was like the life of the party last night. Today, he's just deep in depression. He just doesn't feel like doing anything. It's because of exactly that. Artificial stimulation of dopamine tends to lead to a crash. Other sources of dopamine, sugar will give you a dopamine rush, but unfortunately you're gonna get a dopamine crash. Cigarettes, tobacco, dopamine rush, dopamine crash. Coffee, dopamine rush, dopamine crash. Porn, dopamine rush, dopamine crash. Let's look at this good dopamine that you get. As I said, the good dopamine is the one you have to work hard for. That is the dopamine you get at the end. So you do an activity and the dopamine hit you only get at the end of the activity. Take an example. You go exercising. When you go out for a run, it's tough, you're working hard, but the dopamine hit only comes through at the end of your workout because you get a sense of achievement and fulfillment. Let's take an example. You study and you go through a course and then you pass that course, you get a dopamine rush. There are examples of some good dopamine that you can get in a relatively short time. We have scientific evidence that listening to your favorite music gives you a rush of dopamine. So anytime you're feeling down or low, lacking motivation, go pump your favorite jam and all of a sudden you'll feel a rush of dopamine, and that should give you a bit of motivation. Here's a secret tip. We know that exercise increases dopamine and music increases dopamine. So one sure way to get double dose of dopamine is to go and listen to your favorite track and then go and dance as if nobody's watching. 5, how do we get our bodies to produce more dopamine? So your diet high in protein as well tend to increase your dopamine levels. So make sure you take up a lot of protein. Other simple things that you can do to increase your dopamine levels, like I said, is movement, any form of movement, exercise, running, dancing. As long as your body is moving, we know your dopamine levels will increase. Sleep, you need to get at least 7.5 hours of sleep. Meditation is amazing for dopamine because what does it do? Meditation teaches you how to focus. Meditation teaches you how to remove thoughts. Meditation teaches you how to focus. You are able to control your thoughts. So that is amazing for your dopamine levels. You have to work hard for your dopamine. So for that time you're meditating, your dopamine levels might not be that high, but as soon as you're out of that state of meditation, your dopamine levels are increased. Simple way to get dopamine, get more sunlight. One other way to safely increase your dopamine levels is through medication. If you would like to increase your dopamine levels, you can just speak to your doctor or your psychiatrist and they can recommend medication that you can use to increase your dopamine levels safely. Thank you for staying till the end. As promised, I've posted some videos that you can use to get a better understanding of dopamine. They helped me a lot. I've been 900 days without alcohol. I'm well on my way to hit the 1,000 mark. And you can do the same with anything. Check out the link in the description. I've put some great resources that you can use to help you through this transformation journey. Thank you for watching. Remember to hit the like button if you got some value. Share this video with someone you think might get value from it. And I'll see you on the next video.